Yeah, this topic is it's an urgent issue that is happening now. So I'm hoping that throughout the foundation or all of the things you've heard thus far, you have a really good understanding of what's going on in the nuclear space in the Pacific, in Japan. And so we can start to notice the connections and opportunities for solidarity. One of the things we had a meeting before to try to think, what are the goals of this panel? It's not just to sit up here and talk about it. We actually want something to come out of this. So we've thought about 4 different things that you can be thinking of too, and we hope this will be in dialogue with everyone, use our collective knowledge and strength to do something. So some of the goals are to collectively call on the Japanese government and TEPCO to stop the wastewater discharge, to raise awareness and share resources on current efforts against TEPCO's wastewater discharge taking place across Oceania and the Pacific, to collaboratively design a statement of solidarity based on our conversations, and to collectively urge the government in Aotearoa and New Zealand to uphold its commitments to a nuclear-free and independent Pacific through taking a leading role in urging the Japanese government to halt the discharge of wastewater into the Pacific, and to upholding the sovereign rights of its Pacific neighbors and grassroots organizations in Japan who are calling on the Japanese government to halt the discharge of nuclear pollution into the Pacific. So I will take the time to introduce everyone first. So you've already met Yumi Chiba-san. Maybe I don't have to introduce her too much, but she is calling in from Iwaki City, Fukushima, and you heard about her important activism in the aftermath of TEPCO's nuclear disaster, particularly to protect children from the harm of uranium-derived radionuclides. We have Bedi Racule back on. I'm going to introduce her in case you didn't catch yesterday. So Bedi hails from the Marshall Islands and Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, with links to Hawaii and Fiji. She has just completed her postgraduate degree in development studies at the University of the South Pacific, where she was serving as the former president of MISA for the Pacific, a youth-led grassroots movement to raise awareness for nuclear issues and the safeguarding of our oceans. Bedi is also engaged as an interning ecumenical enabler for climate justice at the Pacific Confederated Conference of Churches and steering committee member of the Nuclear Truth Project. Her work on nuclear advocacy has been to raise awareness about the impacts of the Pacific testing legacy through faith-based organizations, communities, and young people. And we have next to Bedi is Talei Mangioni, is currently a Pacific Studies lecturer and PhD candidate at the School of Culture, History, and Language at the Australian National University. Talei is of Fijian and Italian descent, was born and raised on Gadigal land on the Eroa Nation, and now lives and works on Ngunnawal, and Ngambri lands. I hope, please. Okay, thank you. Her current scholarship aims to chart the nuclear-free and independent Pacific movement across Oceania through historical ethnography and creative works, weaving archival records and material objects with oral histories of activists and artists. She is also a board member of ICANN Australia, member of Young Solwara Pacific, and is the secretary for the Australian Association for Pacific Studies. And on the screen, we have Joey Tao. We're very honored to have with us today. Hello, Joey. So Joey is a deputy coordinator with the Pacific Network on Globalization, a regional watchdog advocating for Pacific people's rights to economic justice and self-determination. He is also part of the regional movement Young Solwara Pacific. And back at the front, we have Duncan Currie. He has practiced international environmental law for 35 years. He was involved in designing the legal case to end France's nuclear weapons testing program in the Pacific and played a key role in persuading the New Zealand government to take the case against France to the International Court of Justice in 1995. He has also been advising Greenpeace on nuclear matters throughout the 35 years of working as a lawyer. He currently advises Greenpeace Korea on legal matters related to the wastewater discharge at TEPCO's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And then we also have from the Miyagi Hub, Futoshi Aizawa. So unfortunately, he's out on his boat this morning, but he will be coming back to join our discussions. He's a local fisherman in Higashi Matsushima City, Miyagi Prefecture, Japan. Futoshi is a third-generation seaweed or nori fisherman and has been working in the fishery field for over 20 years now. He grew up in an environment where he was close to the ocean and nature in everyday life. He has always had a passion for marine education and ocean conservation, presenting in many conferences and workshops both in Japan and internationally to share his experience as a fisherman. Futoshi's dream is to encourage a sustainable future in which can be more connected with nature. So this is another bilingual panel. So we have Tomoki Fukui on the screen helping with translation, and potentially Miku Narisawa will be helping as well in the background at the Miyagi Hub. And so again, we'll just go through, Chiba-san and Futoshi-san have pre-recorded videos and there will be subtitles. So we'll go through the 5 minutes each and then there will be live translation for the Q&A. So we're going to start in Fukushima, Japan with Chiba-san with the video by Yumi Chiba.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chiba-san, for sharing that information and for your passionate activism on this issue. I'm really grateful to be able to speak on this panel just because I wanted to also call on my own government to decry this plan to dump nuclear waste into the ocean. And as we come from the Pacific, you know that the ocean is very central to our well-being, our lives, our happiness, health, and culture. We eat the food that comes from it. We use it for our livelihood to make money, and we travel on it. And it's also a spiritual entity. And you might have seen that beautiful artwork in the art room by Mary and some friends of the ocean being depicted as a person who gives life. So the ocean is life. That's the first thing that I would like to emphasize. And first reason why we should definitely oppose Fukushima waste dumping. This is a sentiment that we can all share as Pacific people, even as Japanese people. We all love fish. And I have a daughter that really loves seafood. So I can empathize with Chiba-san as a mother that we want our children to grow up with a safe and protected ocean. The second reason why I think we should oppose the Fukushima waste dumping is because we are already dealing with nuclear contaminants in our land and in our ocean. And like I mentioned yesterday, the Runit Dome is an impending threat. And something that we all should focus on as well. The deep mistrust by the Marshallese people, not just myself, but as you heard from Ariana yesterday, there is a very deep lack of mistrust on information that is being shared with us. And I realize that Chiba-san can see that there is no transparency as well. The Pacific Island Forum Secretariat has implemented a panel of scientists to look into the issue, and they have found that the data is insufficient to know whether it's safe or not. And yet TEPCO has already began the construction of the pipelines to dump the water. And that's just really disheartening to see that they would go ahead and spend money and start dumping this, preparing to dump this waste. So as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, Project 4.1 was it was just full of lies and deceit with the US government experimenting on our people and not letting us know the true dangers of radiation. In fact, disregarding our human rights. And so I like to repeat again that all of this nuclear colonialism and imperialism would not be possible without racism, deception, and disregard for human rights and human life. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the push for climate energy to become, nuclear energy to be a climate solution has been a bit frustrating, because we know that nuclear energy is a cycle. From the mining of uranium to the dumping of waste, that those parts of the cycle that harm Indigenous people and the global South are left out of the conversation. And Emily shared a wonderful map yesterday, and I really love this map because she didn't have to say much for me to see that all of the nuclear power plants are concentrated in North America and in Europe, and all of the dumping sites and nuclear testing sites are in our oceans. They're in our global South countries, our Pacific. So they continue to benefit off of our suffering, and then head to COP and celebrate how climate friendly they are because they have nuclear power plants. France was celebrating that they were one of the most clean energy companies because they have so many nuclear power plants and mainly powered by nuclear power, yet they have not even acknowledged the victims of the nuclear tests. So yeah, people often say like, okay, well, it's safe. It's very low amounts of tritium. If we allow them to dump this tiny amount today, who's to stop them from coming back again and dumping tomorrow and the next day and again until it's no longer safe, or safe as they claim? There have been over 100 nuclear reactor accidents in history that nobody knows about. We might know about Chernobyl, but there are hundreds of them. So we can't allow our ocean to become a nuclear dumping site. And also on the sidelines, we have AUKUS trying to use our oceans as a highway for nuclear submarines, risking more nuclear accidents in our ocean. So my message is that nuclear energy is not a climate solution, and we should not allow nuclear dumping to happen today, tomorrow, and forever. And we should oppose this. This is a very, very urgent matter. In the Pacific, we have been gathering together for a march on Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day and making this one of our priorities as youth to protect and safeguard our oceans. So I hope you will join us and stand up for our beautiful islands and ocean and our health and our life and well-being. Thank you.
Now we're on to Talei.
Vinaka and Vinaka Bakalevu, Bedi and Chiba-san for your powerful words. I just wanted to point to the past, campaign of the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific movement. This issue with the discharge of Fukushima wastewater is essentially a repetition of what happened in 1979 when Japan proposed to dump 10,000 drums of nuclear waste into the Northern Pacific. Now they're using the language of discharge, which is from land to sea, and somehow that's meant to make it different. Well, it's not. And I've only just found out recently from, reading archives and publications it was like a small piece from Cisco Uladong in the Pacific Daily News, that, this was TEPCO in 1979 doing this proposal as well. So it's the same actors again. And, during it was a short turnaround time as well. They said that they were going to announce dump the waste in 1 year. And we've been dealing with this for the past 2 years now. It's super urgent because the discharge of this nuclear wastewater is happening next year. And I just want to show you, like, through these different periodicals, and I gathered them from No Nuke News or Hagenpatsu News, of the solidarity that went down between Micronesian activists, especially because they were on the front line of this transboundary harm. And you can see people like Rumours from Palau and Nelson and Jane from Marshalls, and you know, Tia Hershon from Mahinui, and Hilda Lini and Mark Pomare as well, coming down in the early 1980s to Japan to speak in solidarity with grassroots activists and communities from Japan who are also protesting this, because it affects both of us. So you can see these rallies. And we also, you know, as Bedi said, viewed this as an intersectional issue. So in these periodicals, you see that, you know, Japanese people were talking about, you know, the extraction of uranium from unceded Aboriginal lands. And, you know, if you have been following the Fukushima issue, you may have seen the Mara people apologize when the Fukushima incident happened 10 years ago, because it was their uranium that, you know, caused this accident. And so, you know, nuclear power is one of those things. It's a risky technology, and it's, you know, on the industrialized nations who choose to, you know, choose this technology to reconsider what they're doing, because, you know, even though Japan at this time in the 80s and even today were, you know, seen as this industrialized superpower type of thing, it's a mansion without a toilet. That's what they would say in these periodicals. So they didn't know how to dispose of this waste properly, and it affects all of us, you know. So I just want to say also that, you know, when this announcement happened that so many, you know, Micronesian activists and Pacific activists rallied together, there were nuclear-free zones declared. There were, you know, the Northern Marianas Congress declared they'd make a nuclear-free zone. The Marianas formed an alliance against nuclear dumping. And eventually this is, people would come to the ANH conferences in Japan as well and say things like, how can Japan, which experienced Hiroshima and Nagasaki, pollute our seas with nuclear waste? They would say, are you going to dump your garbage into our people's yards? You know, turning from assailants to, or from victims into assailants. So I just wanted to highlight that, and how these, and it was in the end, this proposal was ultimately unsuccessful and delayed. And now we're facing it again with this proposal once again. My work and Joey's work and Bedi's work with the Pacific Collective on nuclear issues actually went through the reports from TEPCO. They released, we ended up making a submission last year on behalf of the Pacific Collective on Nuclear Issues, which was comprised and endorsed by the Pacific Network on Globalization, Pacific Conference of Churches, Pacific Islands Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, PNGO, Young Saguaro Pacific, MESA for the Pacific, and Dawn as well, to look at, and we looked at their radiological impact assessment, which was, in our opinion, completely inappropriate. And again, they were using this language of like dilution and safety as a way to, you know, overlook or overlap our concerns, I guess. And we made objections on several aspects, so including the disregard of concerns raised by Pacific leaders, governments, and Pacific Islands Forum at all levels. Again, the limited time frame for public comments on this, and the fact that there was no environmental impact assessment in addition to the radiological impact assessment. And again, it was just, this report just overlooked, you know, the ocean as our spiritual, cultural, economic lifeline, as Bedi was explaining. And it was just a mass disrespect, which was a contravention of our, and also, and disrespect of our nuclear-free Pacific international laws as well. So, and I know that Duncan will be going into that in terms of our Rarotonga Treaty, which is a nuclear-free treaty, different from nuclear weapon-free zones, because it was specifically aimed at, dumping as well as part of it. The London Convention on Prevention of Marine Pollution, the Noumea Convention, the Waigani Convention, so many different things that, it was a disrespect to. So I just want to pass it on to Joey now, because he'll be talking about an update of that. And, Bedi mentioned the scientific panel that reported to Pacific Island Forum. So thank you.
Joey, perfect.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers for convening this important gathering. Greetings from sunny Suva, presenting in the capacity of PANG, but also Young Solora and the Pacific Collective on Nuclear Issues. So good to join you virtually, and I see some familiar faces. Good to see you, Duncan, and was so inspired to hear Hilda this morning. But maybe I wanted to just start off where, and thank you, Talei, for setting the scene, where Bedi talked about the importance of the ocean for, a perspective of Pacific peoples and how we view our worldview of the oceans in regards to these rising threats. And Duncan and I also work in another space on deep sea mining. And next year becomes a very crucial year for our oceans, where we have Fukushima, who is planning disposal come next year. You have deep sea mining, who also have possibilities of applications being approved come next year to commence mining. So next year remains a really important year, rather an interesting year, where the health of our ocean is aggravated further. Just wanted to draw back to how the ocean is usually perceived, and to what Bedi had really said about back then when testing was done. The Pacific Ocean is large, yes, with small island states with huge EEZ. This vast ocean was back then, when we were colonies, back then perceived as territories, and one that didn't need much consultation, one that didn't need much consultation in terms of testing nuclear weapons. Fast forward today, back then it was perceived, it's big for the common good of all mankind, or for the good of the security of the world, we should test these bombs back then. Fast forward today, as independent states, our oceans are again at the forefront of these arising threats, namely Fukushima, and AUKUS, and a number of issues, be it deep sea mining next year. We're constantly trying to push the boundaries as to, for us as Pacific people and activists, as to to what degree do we call it a halt? To what degree do we say enough is enough? To what point we're constantly pushing the boundaries? So for us in the region, when we first had the proposal by Japan, we called for consultation. Specific peoples and people who rely heavily on this ocean. We understand and we respect this is within Japan's jurisdictions, but it needs to understand that the ocean is not just a stagnant continent. It's not terrestrial, it's a liquid continent, and Pacific Island countries will be at the forefront of the receiving end of this, be this disposal. Scientific reports, an independent forum, expert panel that was put by the Pacific Leaders Forum had convened. There was an independent report that came out from this expert panel. And one of the really disturbing terms was it's believed that the ocean will dilute this treated water. And its terminology around this that draws you back again to how the Pacific Ocean, or how the ocean is perceived. It's large, it's big, it's vast. It will take in anything without really considering an ecosystem, a group of islands that really depend on this this mass liquid that we perceive as it's large, big, vast, and could accommodate anything, and could, in Japan's context, could dilute nuclear toxin. Fast forward to this year, Japan has increasingly been visiting the region. The Pacific Island Forum Secretariat has been having consultation with leaders, but prior to when it first announced its proposal, our Pacific leaders came out really strongly, namely Fiji, the Prime Minister of Fiji. You had the President of the Federated States of Micronesia, you had Palau, and then Vanuatu. And that was brought before the Pacific Leaders Forum. And there was great concern raised by our leaders. We continue in our capacity as NGOs and movements within the Pacific, trying to really push our government to call for consultation. That's one that has been lacking, a process that has not been met. You even have Northern Pacific countries that are dealing with today's, or rather nuclear legacy issues, the impacts of nuclear legacy issues. And that's one that we've been closely pushing with the Pacific Leaders Forum. Talei had mentioned a submission. We had made a submission last year, or rather this year, just trying to keep up with process. And we respect and understand that it's an activity that Japan's constructing within its jurisdiction, but it needs to consult the wider citizens who share this ocean, citizens who depend on these oceans. And for us as Pacific people, we see ourselves at the forefront, at the receiving end of this. We will continue to call for wider consultation, working with Japanese groups as to how best we could bring this, but also acknowledging Greenpeace and some of the work Greenpeace has been doing. To be frank, time is short. Japan's in a construction phase. I think it's in its second phase, if people could correct me properly, but it's progressing this with very little, or rather some level of ignorance that it's within its waters and should not consult the Pacific. But I think our leaders have stood firm and said, we oppose this. We call for greater consultation. And we also really call on international institutions such as the IAEA on transparency processes as to how independent technical advice and sound advice is given to our leaders, not one that is done behind closed doors and one that is just done with a secretariat. And throughout next year, we are hoping that our leaders will call for proper, a transparent process of consultation with the IAEA and to accommodate the independent technical experts panel report. That's something that needs to be made public. I think I'll leave it there, and I'll be open to questions later on, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joey, for sharing all of your knowledge on that. And now I'm going to pass it on to Duncan, who's in the room, to talk from the perspective of legal issues in South Korea. Would you rather?
Does that work? Does that work? Yes. So, nice to see everybody here. This is I'll probably have to race through it, but a presentation I've also given to the Korean government and added a little bit to cover the issues here. But just to give you some idea of both the technical and the legal issues, here's a list of radionuclides, including strontium-90, carbon-14, tritium, and note this will be a discharge for 30 years, not a one-off discharge, but a discharge for 30 years, starting off with 1.3 million tons of water, but then of course the water will continue to be added on because it's the contaminated groundwater. So at least another 800,000 tons are expected by 2030. And here's some modeling on the right-hand side. And the simple point is that we know the radioactive water will go north towards Korea and China because that's where it went after the accident. But also the modelling shows it will come down into the North Pacific as well. So countries such as Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Palau and so on are certainly expected to be affected by the radiation. Necessarily they will contaminate the marine ecosystems and threaten human health, which I'll get to. I'll get to. One of the key issues is that the radiological impact assessment, which I think Talei talked about, was not an environmental impact assessment, which is Japan is required to carry out. It was a very limited radiological assessment, not a full assessment of the full effects on the marine environment, and specifically no assessment of effects on ecosystems or cumulative effects over 30 years. Nor was there an assessment of alternatives to the discharge, including a comparison with the radiological impacts. And very briefly, there are alternatives. The simplest alternative is continued storage on land. TEPCO could acquire further land and then build more tanks. And noting that tritium has a very short half-life of about 12 years. So if it was to be stored for 20 years, the radioactivity would have reduced quite considerably in that time. And again, in the radiological impact, there was very much a focus on direct dosage to individual organisms rather than an analysis of the adverse effects on species, on the marine environment, on biodiversity, and on fish and fisheries. Whoops. Yeah, and they are required under the law of the Sea Convention to carry out an environmental impact assessment. There's no doubt about that. And I'm just citing some other, both articles and case law. The most simple provision is Article 194 of the law of the Sea Convention. The countries must take all measures necessary to ensure that pollution arising from incidents or activities within their jurisdiction or control do not spread beyond the areas where they exercise sovereign rights. So that, frankly, is an open and shut case, really. It's without a shadow of a doubt, that is Japan releasing radiation within its own waters, which will necessarily reach international waters and waters of other countries. And yeah, I won't go through the case law, but there's plenty of international case law stating that you have an obligation not to allow your territory to be used for activities contrary to the rights of other states. And one other thing I want to notice is that the effects on the ocean, and particularly the high seas, is what's called erga omnes. It's an effect that affects every single country. So even New Zealand, for example, could take a case against Japan in the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. You don't have to be directly affected. And here, Talei cited a number of regional conventions, the Treaty of Rarotonga, the Waigani Convention, the Noumea Convention, as a few of these. I would note that Japan is not a party to all of them, and so they are, as she expressed it, they're an insult to the Pacific, if not necessarily a legal obligation, but that doesn't matter because the Law of the Sea Convention does govern in this particular context. And talking a little bit about what will be in it, already we know that what's called the ALPS, or the system that Japan will use to treat the water, already 68% of it, the vast majority, already needed further treatment. Just to focus particularly on tritium, it's important that while it is sometimes stated that there's already tritium in the water, this is a different organically bound form of tritium, and that has not been sufficiently studied. We know that fish and invertebrates convert the water form of tritium to organically bound tritium and can take it up through their food processes, and mussels are known to bioaccumulate tritium as well. There's a very famous Canadian study which did find direct damage in Canadian mussels. And there are other far more harmful substances such as strontium-90, which is intended to be removed, but you do not know if it's going to be fully removed in the process. Importantly, Japan is not reducing the radioactive below below detectable levels, only below regulatory levels. And that's a really important distinction. So there will be strontium-90, there will be carbon-14 in the water that's to be discharged. And just noting here that while the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, has undertaken some studies, they made some very clear caveats or warnings. They said, for example, TEPCO has not investigated the impacts of organically bound tritium, what I've just told you about. So TEPCO hasn't done it, nor has the IAEA. Key assumptions on the behavior of radionuclides in the environment have not been established. Unbelievably, sedimentation has not been considered in the dispersion simulations. Well, we all know the radionuclides will accumulate in the sediment on the sea floor. And equally crucially, baseline studies have not been done. And we all know that baseline studies, the study of what is in there at the moment, are absolutely crucial to be able to undertake an assessment of what damage has been caused. And to give one example of the flavor of a very recent discussion, a question was put to Japan: how does the Japanese side consider the health effects of continued exposure of tritium and other toxic substances? Please provide relevant detailed data. Japan's answer, which I've shortened, basically said we would be grateful if China and Russian Federation could provide the relevant information on the studies. In other words, we don't know, tell us. Completely unacceptable. Oops. And so, yeah, I've gone through these key failures. So what can be done? Very simply, any country, any Pacific country, Korea, China, could take a case against Japan and the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, demanding that an injunction, or what are called provisional measures in international law, be exercised. Again, any country can do that. It is expensive, and it would require setting up what's called an arbitral tribunal, and so that would require international funding, fundraising efforts. The Tribunal of the Law of the Sea itself is free. It's already paid for. They've got 20 judges paid for by public funding. So that part of it is free, but then there is an arbitration process with 7 independent arbitrators, which has to be set up. And there was a similar case involving another nuclear power plant called a MOX power plant in the UK, and that did result in provisional measures being ordered, specifically requiring the United Kingdom to consult with Ireland. And yeah, I won't go through the details here, but again, the first step is to file the arbitration notification and together with the request for provisional measures. And it was very quick. It literally could happen in a number of weeks. Here I'm noting here, for example, in the MOX case, a request was filed on 9 December 2001. There were hearings on the 20th of November, and the decision was reached within a month. So it actually happens very, very quickly. Also, what's another important action to be taken is to continue to raise the issue in the London Convention and Protocol. Already Vanuatu for the Pacific, as well as South Korea, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the SPREP program have raised it just very recently, only in October, and opposed by some of the countries, particularly the United States, United Kingdom, and France, and other countries are somewhere in the middle saying, yeah, maybe we can keep talking about it. So it's another option. It probably won't result in stopping Japan, but at least it keeps the international focus on Japan. And so it will be helpful if even more countries can go and support Vanuatu in the next meeting of the London Convention Protocol. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Everyone's taller than me. Thank you so much, Duncan. And we'll do questions at the end. It'll be with everyone. So the last panelist will be Futoshi Aizawa, who we will play a video of his. So we probably need the lights off again. Sorry.
皆さんこんにちは、宮城県東松島で海苔漁師をやっている相沢太です。僕は、漁師になって今24年ですね。24年間海苔養殖っていうのをやっております。その24年でこの海の変化とかそういうすごくこういろんなことにこう気づいているので、 そういうことを今日は紹介したいと思います。よろしくお願いします。はい。原発事故が起きて、やっぱりこう、海で、ね、育つものとか、本来取れるものが取れない状況になって、食べるものが、ね、限られて、その課題を日本人がしっかり知って、やっぱりこう原発のことっていうのは本当にこう知ることが大切だと思いますね。もう遠くの地域で起きた事故っていうだけで済まさずに、もうそこに住んでる人たち、その国の人たち全員が、その事故によってどうなってるのか、今後どうなるのかっていうのをしっかり共有して学ばないといけないと思いますね。一番はやっぱり知ること。知ることがすごくこう大事なのかなって思いますね。核と環境について。核はやっぱりこう原発とか日本にはたくさんあるけども、ないならない方絶対いいと思いますね。何かあった時にとんでもなく自然を壊すっていうのもあるし、人がどうこうできる次元のものではないので、なければない方が絶対いい。で、やっぱりあとは環境問題のことなんだけども、やっぱり海と24年間向き合ってて、本当に海の環境がどんどん悪くなっていってる。自分が考える環境っていうのは、その中で海っていうのは環境の末端だと思ってます。山とか大地とか、それを見るよりも海を見た方が一番わかると思いますね。なんでかって言ったら、その日本の海、今、その海はどういう状況なのかっていうのをこう、詳しく考えると、やっぱりこう、栄養がないっていうことがすごく問題で、海に栄養がない。だから海藻も育たないし、魚も生まれない。そういう状況がどんどんこう深刻化していってます。それを解決するには、漁師だけでは解決できないし、その国に住む人たち、その地域に住む人たちが山から大地から全て環境を守らないと海っていうのは豊かに戻らない。なので、漁師だけでどうこうできる課題ではなくて、その地域に住む人たち、その国に住む人たち全員で、取り組まなきゃいけない問題だと思います。はい。やはり、原発はない方がいいと思いますね。何か問題起きたときに、とんでもないことが起きるので、ないならない方が絶対いいし、それに代わる自然エネルギーとか、そういうのをどんどん活用していっていくしかないんじゃないかなとは思う。これは本当にこう核と直接関わる話かどうかはわからないけども、どう考えてもこれから未来に起こることっていうのは本当に食料が不足すると思うんですね。もうこういう海の状況だし、海に栄養がなかったり、取れるべきものが取れなかったり、そういうのがどんどんこう加速していくので、もっとこう海を豊かにする、海をきれいにするっていう活動じゃなくて、海を豊かにするっていう活動をみんなでやっていかないといけないのかなって思いますね。はい。やはりこの太平洋、この海に面している国々がいかに協力してこの海を守っていくかっていうのはすごくこう大事な課題だと思ってます。なんでかって言ったら、やっぱりこの太平洋、この海っていうのは食べ物が取れる場所で環境を保つ場所。だから海がちゃんとしてないと綺麗な雨も降らせないし、とにかく環境ですね。環境を守る場所だと思って海っていうのは。いい環境を生むのが海だから、例えば酸素でも CO2 の吸収でも雨を降らすでも全て海。だから太平洋に面した国々がこの太平洋をどう捉えるか、それがこうすごくこう大事だと思いますね。
Thank you.